Welcome to Section 6. In this section, Owens introduces the final principle of lean enterprise, the innovation colony. By the end of this section, you'll understand why you need to create an innovation colony inside your company in order to generate disruptive new products at blazing speed. You'll also be armed with case studies from Xerox, Google, and Hearst.
The third idea here is my favorite. Every company today has an innovation lab, and I hate innovation labs because most of them, of course, are also designed around sustaining innovation, where they're beholden to the business units, they're not trying to come up with anything disruptive. And just the idea of a lab is like where ideas go to never escape. So when studying the different structures that companies have used to bring the ideas to market, we've identified a few different structures that work really well, and we've coined this innovation colony. The idea is that it's invoking the idea of when established countries were looking for economic advantage, and they sailed the distant shores, and they founded new nations. So the core idea of the innovation colony is that I've seen so many innovation teams that did absolutely everything right, absolutely everything by the book, had great ideas, were positioned to go to market and be incredibly successful. But what happened? The corporate antibodies came around and said, we don't like this is threatening, so quietly shut it down. And remember, disruptive products are fundamentally different from how companies are used to operating. So you can't have them on a leash, you can't suffocate them, you can't slow them down, or they're going to die. And the point of the innovation colony is to create a level of independence to allow disruptive products to be successful. This includes financial and strategic. So many companies, this manifests itself many times in the form of a spin-out, where a separate entity is created, or it could be as a separate office, right? Actually, you should all know how AWS was created, right? It was a separate office, I believe, in South Africa. But you're giving these disruptive products independence to make their own decisions and to move quickly. And the type of safeguards that companies get are different, right? Most of the time, they have financial safeguards, where they are a investor, and so they have board rights or voter privileges, and also social. A lot of this is based on relationships. So who here can tell me where this product was created? Yes, in the front row. Yes. Right? Xerox created the technology behind the Macintosh. In 1979, Steve Jobs visited Xerox and said, hey guys, can I borrow this graphical user interface? Can I borrow this mouse? These are great ideas. And they said, sure, Steve, go ahead and borrow them. And as we know where Apple is today, and we know where Xerox is today. And this is what I see with almost every innovation lab, is that the ideas never leave unless Steve Jobs borrows them. And this is a well-known story, but you may not know that there's a couple other examples of Xerox PARC. Has anyone ever heard of Ethernet? Ethernet was developed in 1973 by Bob Metcalf, a researcher at Xerox. He tried to convince executives for 6 years to do something with it. He was downloading, I believe it was 3 megabits a second or something like that, maybe a minute. But he was watching Netflix in 1970. And the executives wouldn't do anything with the technology. So he actually left and started a company called 3Com, which later went public. And there's another example. The graphical software that ended up founding Adobe. Researchers were there for 5 years, and Xerox wouldn't do anything with it. Executives said, oh, this isn't core to what we do today. This isn't core to our identity. It's not, we don't have a strategic advantage in it. We're not going to do anything with it, right? So there was no incentive to commercialize technology. And about 5 years later, a book was written by 2 McKinsey consultants called Fumbling the Future, which featured Xerox. And finally, when 2 McKinsey consultants wrote about it, the executives decided to do something about it. And they founded Xerox Technology Ventures. And Xerox Technology Ventures was an internal venture fund. That's probably the best way to describe it, as an internal venture fund. And basically, they had $30 million in funding, which is not a lot in that time period. This is in the late 80s. And they could write a $2 million check to researchers to get them started without any approval. And they had internal access to sales teams and marketing teams and a lot of internal resources. And so this is how the new entities worked. They were separate companies. Xerox had 80% of the ownership. The researchers got 20% of the ownership. And they funded several businesses. They worked with other venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. In 7 years, guess what happened with this? The value of their portfolio and the companies they wrote the first check in was worth more than Xerox after 7 years. Okay? Doing these spin-outs. In 12 years, those companies are worth 10 times Xerox. So, giving companies independence and working with outside investors allowed them to reach success. And my favorite part of this story is that at the same exact time frame, there were many internal innovation teams. Guess how many of those internal innovation teams were successful? And in fact, they invested more money in internal innovation teams than the $30 million of pocket change they gave to Xerox Technology Ventures. None. So I love this case study. I highly recommend that you read up more on it because there was actually a documented control group of the difference between spinning out companies and keeping them inside.